then Prodigy was a totally different experience for me where, yes, I did advise on the science, but the writer's room, they all had some extent of like science interest and they did a lot of research
Okay.
themselves. Where I came into it was more about teaching and education and shaping characters that would inspire future scientists. And so that was more my role as a science advisor, which was super unique.
What's going to rise? Webster's out, the man, the voice, the fragrance. And we're here with someone who I am excited to talk to ever since I realized, hey, this is a thing and this is awesome. What she does is Dr. Erin Macdonald. I'm saying that right, Macdonald, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay, great.
absolutely. No worries.
Um, she is an astrophysicist and she's also a science advisor to the current iterations of Star Trek that I've seen most of right now. Dr. McDonald, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I thank you for being here. Now, I have to ask you, when did your love of Star Trek start?
Later than most, I will admit. I didn't get into it until I was at university, and I kind of like to joke because I was a physics major. And there's a big intersection in the Venn diagram of physics majors and Star Trek fans, and so we would have our sort of physics parties, as it were, and Star Trek would be on. And that was sort of my first exposure to Star Trek. And then we graduated the night the 2009 Kelvin film reboot came out. And
Okay.
so we made that part of our graduation. We all did the thing, and then we went to the midnight release of that film. And I remember going to it, and it was just filled with Trekkies, and I just looked around and I was like, "Oh, these are my people. Like this is a thing I could get into." And I fell in love and never looked back.
That's awesome. I remember going to that film, and I myself I blame my mother because my mother got me started watching the original Trek. So I liked it, but I fell in love with it with Next Generation.
Yeah.
And I won't no, I mean let me say I'll say I started to fall in love with it during the movies, like Star Trek 4, particularly 3, 2. I think I watched 3 the most because we actually had the VHS for that growing up. So I watched that so many
Okay.
times.
Yeah.
Um, but the Next Generation was when I got a series that was mine, and I think that's when I really became deep in the lore, and it just went on from there. So I love everybody has their different starting
Yeah.
points with Trek because it's such a wide array of stories and a wide universe when it comes to the books, the video games, the TV series, the movies. Everybody has a starting point, and that's fun. It's so amazing, but we still all come together on this common thread.
100%. I love that. There's no wrong way and there's no age at which it's too late to get into Star Trek. 100%.
Exactly. Now, you got into Star Trek late. Was there any other sci-fi that you're really into growing up, especially to feed your STEM sort of mindset growing up?
Yeah, I think, you blame your mom for getting you into Star Trek. I blame my parents for not getting me into sci-fi because they are very much not sci-fi people. So that was not something we had on in the house.
Right.
But growing up in the 90s, the X-Files was
Mm,
huge. And I wasn't especially when it started, I was not technically allowed to be watching it, but I was the only
understood.
one who knew how to program our VCR.
Right. What
So,
was that? Sundays at 9 p.m. So
yep.
yeah, that was probably if you grew up in the 90s, yeah, that was past your bedtime. Heck, I was a teenager for part of the 90s, and even before that was past when I was usually up on a Sunday night. This is
Yeah, and even if it wasn't past your bedtime, you still really shouldn't have been watching it because it was
yes,
very much advertised as a scary show. And
yes.
but I defied that, and a lot of that was because I was a redheaded kid and I saw this awesome
Jillian's,
woman in the
yes,
ads, and
yes.
I just wanted to be her and I wanted everything to do with her. And so I was obsessed with Dana Scully and I would watch the X-Files in secret, and that was like my main entry point. And even Star Wars I got into a little bit later because I wasn't introduced to it until something Thanksgiving with cousins, who put Star Wars on, and that was the first time I had seen it. And that was mid 90s, so that was like before the prequels, but certainly not like born and raised with.
Right. You know what? One of the things personally I wish I could have, not saying I regret growing up on all these things as a child born in the 70s, growing up in the 80s. So that's like was religion for me. But it's amazing seeing whether it's young kids now or even older adults, or older kids or adults experiencing these things that I grew up with for the first time and seeing the wonder and the imagination spring forth. I absolutely love that. And I wish sometimes I could revisit that moment because once you have it, you can never go back to it.
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of that magic I wish I could capture again.
Well, the X Files is not a bad place to start. I think that with a show like that, with it being out of the ordinary, but still having so much reality in it as well, was definitely a good starting point for anybody to get into as far as sci-fi was concerned.
I think so. Yeah. It was a good entry point. And I loved aliens. And so it was anything to do with aliens. That was a big obsession of mine for a long time.
Well, that makes sense considering your field of choice in many
Exactly.
respects. So, how did you stumble on to becoming the technical advisor for Star Trek?
Yeah, it's not a straightforward journey. It's not one that they necessarily advertise as a job,
Right.
I was in academia for a long time. I did my PhD in astrophysics, as you mentioned. I stayed in research for a couple of years, but then I realized like becoming a professor wasn't necessarily a career goal of mine.
Right.
And so I started looking for other options, and I did public teaching for a while, but I couldn't pay my student loan payments. And
Hmm.
so I started working in aerospace engineering, but I really missed teaching. And so I would go to sci-fi conventions as a fan, and I realized they have like open panels where you could submit ideas for talks. And I started giving talks on like the physics behind Star Trek or science behind Star Wars and all of these different talks. And they got really popular. And then life for me, I always wanted to get into TV and movies. Like I was obsessed with film growing up, and I assumed everyone else was too. And so I, ruled that out honestly as
Right.
a career because I was like, well, everyone wants to do this, obviously. Turns out that's not true. But as an adult, I realized, oh no, I really love the entertainment industry, and I had an opportunity to move to Los Angeles as part of my engineering job. And
Hmm.
so I moved here where I live now. And but word had gotten around of my physics of, at sci-fi conventions. And so the Star Trek franchise invited me to come speak at their licensed events, so the official Star Trek events,
Nice.
to give those same talks, physics behind Star Trek or like what's behind warp drive and all of this
Mhm.
stuff. And then this was right at the beginning of this new resurgence of Star Trek series. And so Discovery had just started when I was doing this. And they were getting geared up for season 3 of Discovery, where they changed showrunners to Michelle Paradise. And she had this idea for the storyline, which was the burn and everything else. And
Mhm.
she wanted to have some scientists come help with it. So I interviewed like anyone else. They just had a short list of people that they had known. And I passed muster, and I got to go on with another friend of mine, Professor Mohammed Noor, who's a biologist. And so we got to work together, that we had actually met giving talks at sci-fi conventions. And but then I was in LA, and this was something I was really passionate about. And so I kind of pushed for it a little bit, and they had all of these shows getting greenlit. And so they decided it would be worth it to bring on a science advisor for just the entire franchise. However much or little all these shows want to use me, but then it doesn't have to be a deal per show. I'm just available to the entire franchise. And so it's a little bit of self promotion, it's a little bit of, hard work and being in the right place at the right time. But yeah, it's a job I'm incredibly grateful for, and I'm just really excited to be a part of such a legacy.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I love that aspect of it. I was talking to a writer yesterday. He does comics, but one of the things he really illuminated was that there's so many things that writers do in so many ways that writers kind of impact everything that you don't even realize it. And your story really, while you're not writing, is still very much there are other aspects of getting in the business that people don't necessarily think about, where you love entertainment, you love this, you may not be an actor, you may not be a writer, but there are other ways to get involved in the creative process that aren't typically advertised like that, but they are available.
Yeah, and I will, if I can, just interject as well that like it when I got the job with Star Trek, this was a lifetime of not knowing what I wanted to do as a career and not really finding my place. And then obviously, I mean, this is a huge career goal for anyone with an astrophysics degree.
Right.
And but I did have a huge crisis of just thinking like, well, what do I do after this? This job isn't going to last forever. And that's when I realized, and part of it was through working on Star Trek Prodigy, that my passion really lies in storytelling. And I've never thought of myself as a writer, but as soon as I opened that door of
Hmm.
possibilities for myself, that I realized that that is something I'm passionate about and have been working towards since then. So it's been a few years now of learning and being humble and starting from scratch, but really finally finding my passion and finding what I'm interested in. So, yeah, we'll see where it goes. But the science advisors before me for Star Trek, Naren Shankar and Andre Bermanis, who were the science advisors through the 80s and 90s, they went on to be writers and showrunners and, have full careers in the entertainment industry beyond being science advisors. And that's something I'm really hoping to follow in the path of.
Got you. I'll say this though, and I'm glad you realized that. But one of the things you really talked about, especially in your bio, but even what you did before, you talked about education, you talked about teaching. I've always looked at teachers tell stories. They just tell stories to get people to learn, to understand certain things. As someone who is, I have a STEM background myself. My bachelor's and master's are in marine science and environmental science, and I've taught as well, at least on the collegiate level. And one of the things I liked, especially going to your YouTube videos, was that interjection of sort of pop culture, things that people would understand and relate to. And that spoke to me because that's how I taught in the classroom. I always tried to make it so, or tell a story that there are references that my students understood, and how it really illustrated the main idea of whatever topic I was talking about, whether it is commensalism or what have you. And I think that is an aspect of writing as well, that storytelling. Even in my profession, what I do for a living, people write all these sort of technical papers and whatnot, and really when it comes down to it, we just tell them, look, you're telling a story.
Yeah.
We're just telling who your audience is. But yes, this is scientific technical paper. You're describing this great innovation, but at the end of the day, you're still telling a story, and you need to be able to convey your story to a point where the writers understand what you're trying to say, and also they want to give you money for it too.
Yeah.
Um, but education is in my opinion all about storytelling. So I think that, for me, looking from the outside looking in, that really is a natural progression based on what I know and what I've seen you put out into the world.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I certainly have found it more natural than I expected it to be. And I think you hit the nail on the head of how one can end up going down that path for sure.
So you're writing, like, so you trying to write books, you trying to write your own series, or is it too early to divulge that yet?
No, I think my ultimate goal would be to be staffed in a TV writer's room. I
Okay.
It's a very collaborative environment, which is something that I've discovered I really like. And again, I've there's a little bit of a difference between me and the science advisors of the past for Star Trek in that they were on one show at a time.
Hmm.
I'm doing up to 5 shows at once.
Right.
And so I'm able to be exposed to all different types of showrunners, different types of storytelling. We have adult animation, we have
Right.
hard sci-fi drama, we have episodic, we have serial storytelling. And so I'm absorbing all of this information. But the ultimate thing is I really do love that collaborative nature.
Mm.
And so I I feel like my natural place is within television and writers' rooms, but I'm not limiting myself to that. You
Right.
know, I've played with writing feature films. Just some of those stories that have stayed with you. I think everyone has stories they've heard, whether they're family stories or whether they were something they heard growing up that's always stuck with them. And when you get older and being in this position where you can be like, man, I think that'd make a really good movie, and taking that opportunity to write it, and then just pushing yourself into things like novels. I've never been, I broad strokes have been like, I wonder what it was like to write a book, and
Mm.
years ago, and failed miserably at it because I had no training and no structure and no knowledge of any of this. But now that I do, it's like, well, let's try to write a book, let's give
Right.
myself the space and the freedom to take everything I've learned and apply it and see if it is something I'm interested in. So ultimately television, um but you kind of have to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall in this industry. And
Understood.
so yeah, pushing yourself out of your limits is important and crucial, and I don't hate it. I think it's a lot of fun.
So now I have a quick, you brought up something I was thinking about earlier. I didn't realize you worked on all of the shows sort of simultaneously. Is there any, as far as what you do, is there any big difference, say, compared to doing Strange New Worlds and Discovery versus doing Lower Decks and Prodigy? 'Cause I can imagine, especially the tone of each. Prodigy and Lower Decks could be different unto themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And even the live actions are different in their own way, particularly with the way that they approach science.
Mhm.
Discovery, I think, from the beginning, but certainly when they flashed forward and when I came on, not because I came on, but through
Right.
the nature of what they were trying to do, from season 3 onward, they really leaned into these are scientists who are doing
Yes.
science.
Yes.
And so they are very science focused. And I worked very hard on Discovery. There was a lot of being almost in the room from day one of breaking a season for seasons 4 and 5, to just be like, we want these stories rooted in science. It's Strange New Worlds. There are episodes that are rooted in science, but because it's an episodic series and because it harkens back to the original series where there's not a ton of science in green glowing hands that come out of an atmosphere.
Right.
So some a lot, some not so much. And then Prodigy was a totally different experience for me where, yes, I did advise on the science, but the writers' room, they all had some extent of like science interest and they did a lot of research
Okay.
themselves. Where I came into it was more about teaching and education and shaping characters that would inspire future scientists. And so that was more my role as a science advisor, which was super unique, compared to all the other shows. And then Lower Decks is just candy for me. Like it's fun, and we do
Right.
have some episodes where they do get very like the end of season 2 where they, they're accompanying the first contact and there's a disaster that happens in the solar system and they have
Right.
to warp through the like debris field. There was a ton of science in that one episode.
Right.
But I barely worked on the rest of the season. So yeah, it's fun to have all that variety.
Okay. I love that aspect you brought up about Prodigy, though. I I, I think that we forget how, as far as being adults, sometimes we forget how those things shape children, and the fact that you guys are actually like, this is something that we're actively thinking about as we write, as create the show. While the show is for children, and there are shows for children that are just shows for children. They don't really enhance the child. I'll put it that way. Um, and so the fact that that's actually actively being thought about is amazing and fascinating to me. And I'm definitely like not Discovery, Prodigy is the one show that I have not gotten into that I need to. It's just that the only shows I've watched religiously, Strange New Worlds. I've gotten into Discovery but it took me a while only because I just wasn't feeling the first two seasons. But I think after you came on, and I'm attributing all this to you, at least with this change in storyline, it did a very good job in making it its own Star Trek instead of being in the shadow of other stuff. And that's
Yeah.
just my opinion. And personally, I am vehemently against reboots for the most part. But then I watch Strange New Worlds. Oh my God, I love that show.
It's so
Like
good.
it
It's
is
so
so
good.
good. So good. And then Picard, I was just say Picard season 2 and 1 and 2, in my opinion, left much to be desired. But season 3 hit a home run out. Season 3 was a grand slam as far as I was concerned.
Okay,
So,
nice. Yeah,
so
and I mean you can probably surmise from seasons 2 and 3 because I wasn't brought on board until season 1 of Picard had
mhm,
already finished, but 2 and 3 there wasn't much science there. And
mhm,
so in terms of
right.
science advising, like I was barely involved in those two seasons. And like you, I enjoyed the process and I enjoyed those characters and certainly being a part of that legacy, but for me, yeah, it's a great time, I think, to be a Star Trek fan because, like you
Yes.
said, everyone has a different type of Star Trek, and there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with liking one and not liking the other. You don't have to be into all of it,
Right.
and I think that's great.
I agree. I don't I love the fact that there's so many different types of Trek right now. Even you can go back to the movies and the Kelvin universe and everything. It offers something a bit different. Like we have, I'm a fan of a lot of different genres. Wrestling's one of them, and it's so many wonderful things going on in wrestling. And I make that comparison to Star Trek because there's
Hmm.
so many different types of Star Trek. There's so many different shows, different characters, different types of shows that if you're a Trekkie, you're eating really good right now as far as the different types of Trek that you can actually watch compared to, say, growing up in the 90s. Okay, yeah, we 80s, 90s, we got Next Generation, the Next Generation happened, then we got a little bit of overlap with Deep Space Nine. Okay,
Right.
then we got Deep Space Nine, then we got a little bit of overlap with Voyager, then Voyager ended, we get Enterprise, and that's pretty much it, except for the handful of movies.
Yeah.
And then we had to wait until Discovery. Now
Yep.
it's what five different shows? Well, we've
Yeah.
had what
5
five different
shows.
shows in
Yeah.
the matter of what the past what 6 7 years.
Yep. Yeah.
It's really ridiculous when you
Exactly.
think about it. It's
Yeah, and I
crazy.
think you're right. Like with the way that Star Trek used to be, people kind of were like, "Well, I love Star Trek, so I have to like this one show because it's the only thing that's on."
Right,
But now there's 5 to choose from, and you don't have to like all of them. It's
right.
okay if you don't. But I hope people give them a chance because I do think, for example, I think Lower Decks, not a lot of people who are like Star Trek fans
Hmm.
necessarily watched because it was adult animation and it was a show run by a guy who came from Rick and Morty. But when you start watching it, it is written by fans for fans.
Right. And
Like
that's
it's
exactly
so
what it
nerdy
happened
and
with
deep
me. I
cut.
wasn't sure. Then I started watching it and like, oh, this is great. Like just the all the Easter eggs and inside jokes, like, oh, this is my show. This
Yeah,
is so my show.
yeah. It is hanging out with fellow Star Trek fans. That's all it
Yeah,
is.
I always tell people like, look, college, like luckily I had a Trekkie for a roommate my first year of college. So we had, I think it was the Star Trek maybe 25th anniversary, make some, I don't know, it had this big picture of all the different quadrants. We had it on our wall and we're sitting there and we're like trying to watch episodes of Voyager because I went to school on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I'm originally from Baltimore. So I knew what time it came on. Going to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, we didn't really have cable in the dorm yet. This is what, 96. So we relied on the local station, and the local station showed it at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. What college student is in their dorm room watching Star Trek, regardless of how big of a trek they are, at 1 o'clock on a Saturday? So
Brilliant.
I've had to catch up. Like I had to catch up on Deep Space Nine because I like last season I was in my freshman year. Like there's no way to watch it. So I caught up on a lot of stuff, and even now, like I am rewatching a lot of Voyager because I missed a lot being in school. Like I saw the finale and saw bits and pieces, but I'm rewatching a lot of it because I just missed it during that time period. Because well, I was in college, other things going on besides Star Trek.
Which is fine. Perfectly valid.
So you're a guest at Farpoint convention. I keep on saying Farpoint Encounter for obvious reasons, but how Is this your first Far Point?
It is, and I'm so excited to be there. I've been in the convention space for a long time,
All right.
but only in the last few years have I been in the Star Trek convention space, and I love it. I'm very excited. I've had many people tell me how great Farpoint is, and so yeah, I'm really excited to be there this year.
Well, I'm excited too because this is my first one actually. Even though I am local, like I said, from Baltimore originally, I'm not quite in Baltimore anymore, but I'm not that far away. It's just one of those the beginning of the year conventions always come and go before I even realize they happened.
I
So this
know.
year I was a bit proactive, like, okay, what's coming up? What do I want to go to? And here we are. I'm going to Far Point. So I'm excited. I've seen many of my friends go over the years and they've just had a blast. So I'm excited for this too. So if you want to go to Farpoint Convention, it's at Pikesville, Maryland, not September, it's not September, February 9th through 11th, 2024. When we're watching this, all the details will be below. If you want to go buy your tickets today, by the time this comes up, you also have plenty of time to get your tickets and to go. Not just Dr. McDonald's going to be there, a whole bunch of other guests from Star Trek, cartoons, the Orville, a lot of other different guests are going to be there as well. Come in your cosplay, come with your things to sign, and just come to trek out with fellow Trekkies. Dr. McDonald, thank you very much. Where can everybody find you?
Yeah, thank you. So aside from Farpoint and the various other Star Trek events throughout the year, you can find me online. I'm at Dr. Erin Mac, DrErinMac, on Instagram and on Blue Sky, if anyone's over there. And then I also have a YouTube channel called Dr. Erin Explains the Universe. You can find it just at Erin Macdonald, Mac, Donald, old Scottish play style. and,
Gotcha.
but yeah, and just to echo, what you said about Farpoint, I was so scared when I first started going to Star Trek conventions that I wasn't worthy enough or big enough fan to go. And I will just emphasize for anyone listening that, like, if you have a passing interest in Star Trek, go to this convention, find your
Right.
people. It's so fun. It's so welcoming. It's such a family. You'll have a great time. So I'm excited to meet you and anyone else
Definitely.
there.
Well, thank you, Dr. McDonald. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in the next couple of weeks. You guys, hope you enjoyed the interview. Definitely check out our YouTube channel. Some great stuff there. But Webster Style, I'll see you later. Peace.